Good evening, everybody. Coming to you from a surprisingly sunny Birmingham evening, actually, as we are ready to talk all things Cleveland Browns. Better get your gold jackets out because we're talking Hall of Fame game.
Just the same old Browns! Garrett's going to get him, and he knocks the ball away. Caught by Donovan Peoples-Jones! Touchdown! He got it! He got Chubb! He's to the 30, 20, 10, 5, touchdown! Wow, what a struggle. The way it should be, I guess. Brownies, here we go! Woo, woo. Here we go, Brownies!
Yes, everyone, football is back. No, we're not on about a soccer game. We're on about American football. The Browns were the first team to take the field this season with the New York Jets, overcoming them 21-16. I say it's the Browns. It was kind of a facsimile of them. I think only about one starter actually took the field, at least from what we were expecting to be the starting cohort. But there were some good performances in there. We'll take a look at that, as well as a fair few other things that have happened in the world of the Cleveland Browns this week. Sean, how are you today, bud?
I'm good, mate. Really good. As you say, it's a nice sunny day for the first time seemingly forever this year. So, yeah, all good, mate.
Fantastic. And Owain, I can see that you're just getting yourself situated. We put out an APB for you and everything else to get your whereabouts, but gladly you are now here in situ. How's your week been, mate?
It was all right up till now, and then my phone decided to not turn on for half an hour, and I've been screaming at it for the last half hour. So, yeah, I'm only just calming down, I think.
Well, don't worry. Can't be as bad as me last week, where I literally had to step away for an Asda delivery. I have got it on good authority that no such delivery is expected today. So... It's still the preseason. We're still shaking. We're still shaking off the niggles and getting ourselves season ready. So we're all good. We're all good. Speaking of the preseason, chaps. So Browns Jets 21-16. Always nice to actually see a positive in the Browns column, even when it's preseason. I think that just from our days of old, whenever I see the Browns start off with a loss, it sort of just fills me with dread. But good to see us in the win column. Quite a few takeaways, I think, actually, from that, even though obviously it was all to do with the backups and them jostling for their right to be part of the Browns organization going into September onwards. Quite a few interesting points. Let me just throw some stats at you before I ask for your takeaways. So when it came to the quarterbacks, Kellen Mond had completed 13 of 19 for 92 yards, scored a touchdown and an interception. Dorian Thompson-Robinson, God, that's going to be a long one to say throughout the rest of this podcast. DTR, let's stick with that, shall we? DTR was 8 for 11, 82 yards and a touchdown, and also ran 6 times for 36 yards. With the receivers, Austin Watkins and Cedric Tillman both had 2 receptions each for 35 yards each. They were the top performers there. John Kelly ran 10 times for 42 yards, and I don't know if that's the other way around, actually. And then which way round was that? I do apologise. I've written the stats without seeing if they're receiving or rushing.
10
rushes, 10 rushes for 42 yards. See, I knew it was right. And then 4 receptions for 27 yards and a touchdown. On the defensive side, the only real thing of note was right at the end of the game, Bubba Bolden getting that last-second interception, of which the celebrations have been seen all over Cleveland Twitter, Instagram, and all the rest of it. Cade York missed a 49-yard sitter. There we go. I knew I'd get a laugh from somewhere. Corey Bahor, and then it was kind of a punter's challenge, stupidly enough. Corey Bahorquez with 2 kicks for 124 yards. Joseph Charlton 2 for 97 yards. I mean, there's not really much you can say about the punter challenge, folks, but I'd be interested to see as to what your takeaways were from that. Owain, let's start with you, bud.
It was nice to see a nice, competent QB performance in the second half. That was enjoyable. Tillman actually stood out. I think the main takeaway for me was the rookies' performance. I think all of them flashed like really, really good performances. Obviously, it's hard to tell this early on in the preseason when the competition's not amazing. But I thought Dorian Jones, who actually did come up against some good competition, actually. A couple of first-rounders, Will McDonald, Jermaine Johnson, and Bryce Huff as well, who was good for the Jets last year. And he stood tall, very, very tall.
Yes. Yes, he is a monster of a man, isn't he? He's 6'8", and I think I read somewhere he was like 240 pounds.
He looks an absolute monster, even compared to other monsters by like normal people standards. He is different, and he put in a really good performance. Whitebler put in a good performance. Tillman. So to see a rookie class who obviously weren't picked super, super highly in the draft, all showing flashes of potential was nice to see, in my opinion. Yeah.
Yeah, fantastic. I'd agree there. I thought the rookie class did really well. Made it watchable. I stayed up and watched it up until I think the end of the third quarter, and then my eyes just gave way. But until that point, it was a very, very watchable game. Shaun, what's your main takeaway from that? But I don't think that you'd have been able to have stayed up for that one. I think your job kind of makes that impossible. That plus kids, of course. But what did you make of it?
Yeah, I would agree. I think the biggest positive was Dorian Jones. I've got to be honest, mate. If you can make Dorian Jones 240 pounds, then I wish you could make me half of my weight. He's actually 374 pounds, Dorian Jones.
Sorry. Yeah. Do you know? I knew the number was big. I knew the number was big, and for American weightings always get me out of kilter. But yeah, no, I knew it was something. When I put it back into English, it was obscene.
He's a big boy. He's probably 27 stone, something like that.
Did you say how much did you say? Sorry,
374.
374 divided by, there's 14 pounds in a stone, isn't there? 26 3/4 stone.
There you go, my friend. There you go. So yeah, like I said, he's a big old boy. But yeah, he played very well, didn't he? I think there's a lot of hope that he might turn into something, down the line. If you look at the tackle play last year, Jedrick Wills obviously came in for a bit of criticism. It's a big year for him. They obviously decided to pick up the 5th-year option, which I think is probably the right thing to have done. But it obviously now becomes a make or break year for him. They were encouraged by the play of James Hudson to sort of keep him around, and I think he's going to be sort of in that battle as well. And obviously Jack Conklin's proved that he's not the most durable of players. I think everyone was probably a little bit surprised when he got a new contract based on his injury history and the other amount of money that they got tied up in the line. So I think if they can get anything out of Dorian Jones, that'll be viewed as a real positive. And it's often the case in pre-season, isn't it, that it's not necessarily the skill players that make the sort of, too many flash plays, if you like. And it is really those trenches and those depth pieces that are really sort of battling, if you like, for their spots on the roster. And I thought he looked quite good. I think Luke Whitebler as well, also another lineman. He played a fair amount of snaps as well. And he played well. So there's a couple of rookies there that'll be fighting for positions on that line. I think historically we've kept, correct me if I'm wrong, chaps, we've kept 10 pretty much every year in sort of this sort of era, if you like, of the Stefanski era. So you're going to be keeping, probably 4 tackles, 4 guards, 2 centres, and obviously if you've got somebody that can play a little bit of everything, then it's obviously going to stand them in good stead. And I think White was potentially one of those that could play some centre, play some guard. So he's got a good chance of sticking around as well. I thought overall the game was well, let's put it this way. It's great that football's back, and I say this every year because we miss it so much, and then it's back. So we shouldn't be ungrateful for the fact that it is back. But I think what it really does show is the huge drop off in quality from NFL starters to NFL prospects. Because obviously the level of play and the level of competition, severely lacking throughout. The quarterbacks combined for 300 yards between 5 people that threw balls on the Thursday night.
What are you on about? The XFL's a great product.
Yeah, but you can see why it's got its space, can't you? Because as I said, the drop off is huge, isn't it? So, but like you say, plenty to be positive about. Never a bad thing to start winning games. All right, I know it's only pre-season. I know we've won 3 or 4 pre-season games previously, and then got on to have terrible seasons. But it's not the worst thing to get into the habit of winning games, is it? So, a good start overall.
Exactly. I mean, I don't care as to who it is that I support and what kind of game it is. It always hurts to see us concede, and it always makes me smile a bit more when we see a score. So definitely on that. Okay, so we all agree that the rookies seem to have their place. There doesn't seem to be any that we're automatically looking at and going, oof. So that's not really a question. Instead, let's go with one of the bigger questions from that game. Dorian Thompson-Robinson. Now, he was the man, at the end of that game. It was all that anyone could talk about. I know that it's week 0 of the preseason and people are looking for literally anything to hang on. But when you consider the style of player that he is and the way that he came out against players who are kind of within his current trajectory, within his current wheelhouse, and therefore you've got that as your base to build up from. You look at the quarterback room that we currently have. So we've got obviously Watson, who's the undoubted starter. Then underneath that, you've got Kellen Mond as the QB3 within this current setup. And then you've also got Josh Dobbs, who is seen as the number 2. With DTR having a performance like the other night, where it's argued that he was better than, I mean, to be honest with you, he looked a lot better than Mond. Considerably. The stats sort of scream competitive, but DTR definitely seems to have the better trajectory and all the rest of it. Does DTR claim the QB3 spot? And, is there actually a push for him to be QB2 and try and get some draft capital or any kind of consideration for Josh Dobbs, considering the quarterback market currently? Open that up to the floor.
Yeah, I think the question of QB3 is not really a question for me, and I don't think it was particularly before the game either. I think they would have drafted Thompson-Robinson with, full intention for him to be QB3 at least, because realistically, if he was QB4 and he was on the practice squad, he'd be claimed by some other team, and he would have been, stashed on a roster elsewhere. So definitely QB3. Is a good question between him and Dobbs for QB2, and I think that'll be a good battle pre-season, because there's obviously a financial benefit to keeping DTR as QB2 and then shipping Dobbs off. Whether that's for draft capital or not, there's a financial gain to be made there. They've obviously made the investment in DTR, with the intention of him eventually being QB2. I'd love it if somehow he ends up as QB1 and, has like some sort of meteoric rise. And
eventually, right?
No,
eventually.
No, not eventually. I hope he just goes in and smashes it this year, and we can trade Watson for a 6th rounder next year for all I care. But
for a 6th rounder.
The dreams aside,
to be honest with you, that contract would probably only warrant a 6th rounder.
Yeah. Dreams aside, I think QB2 long term, and if he can do it in the short term, that obviously benefits the Browns a little bit by saving a little bit of cap space. So but it was really encouraging to see him play well. I would probably temper expectations a little bit and say Dobbs looked really good in preseason last year as well, if you remember. So we've seen backup QBs play well in preseason before. We'll see it plenty of times again, but encouraging, definitely.
Yeah. Hey, I mean, you say that Dobbs started a playoff game for the Titans, didn't? Was it a playoff game for the Titans?
Yeah,
It was, wasn't it? Yeah.
No, it was a game to get into the playoffs. I think it was them.
Okay, so it was a pre-playoff game. Yeah. I knew it had some sort of playoff implication, but hey, they trusted him enough for that. Sean, what do you think, mate? Obviously, it's very early doors, so the skepticism is obviously there. And you're usually our level-headed gentleman of the trio.
Yeah, I think Owain's probably just made my point for me right at the end there that, like I said, this time 12 months ago, we were all kind of jumping up and down on the Josh Dobbs bandwagon, weren't we? That he looked pretty good in pre-season, and people were asking that he should start over Jacoby Brissett based on the pre-season play and everything. So, look, they obviously drafted him for a reason. It was a bit of a strange choice when it was made because obviously there's so much commitment gone into Watson. And let's be honest, this conversation hopefully is completely irrelevant because from a football perspective, you don't want the backup quarterback to even be a consideration this year unless it's week 18. The starters are having a week off. That's the only time we want to see the backup quarterback, if indeed we are going to use the backup quarterback. So hopefully, he certainly looked impressive. I think taking context the rest of the game, I said how disappointed I think overall the standard was the other night. If you look on the overall sort of play of all of the quarterbacks, Zach Wilson had that one long ball, which he ends up with 65 yards, 57 on one throw. And then the rest between them, like I say, Tim Boyle, Kellen Mond, Chris Strevler, they all looked, quite inept, let's be honest. So Dorian Thompson-Robinson, DTR, as you say, looked certainly the most exciting out of the bunch. The fact that he obviously has got something with his legs is encouraging. He's obviously probably in the sort of Watson mould, so to speak, from that regard, where, Watson predominantly is going to try and make the plays with his arm, but he has got the legs, as and when to use sparingly. And hopefully that's what DTR brings. So he was obviously viewed as somebody that they could bring in to almost act as that sort of, like-for-like replacement, obviously with a much lower level of expectation. So I would certainly be expecting him to stick around. And look, if it makes business sense, like I say, ultimately, we don't want the backup QB to be involved at all. If you can get anything for Josh Dobbs, to be honest, I think it'd be silly not to take a look at it and sort of go down that avenue, to be honest. So yeah, like I say, he certainly did himself no harm at all, did he, the other night? And fingers crossed, he'll get plenty of playing time. I know they've announced more starters for this week, so you'd expect Watson will play a series or two. Dobbs will probably play a half or the vast majority of a half, and then it may well be that Mond and Thompson-Robinson get a series or two each, depending on how many possessions we end up getting. So he certainly put himself in the conversation, and as I say, he was certainly a bright spark on the night.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, that is right. So today it was announced in a press conference with Sean Watson that he expects to start the week 1 preseason game. So we've had week 0. This is week 1 of the preseason against the Commanders on Friday night. So you imagine that the entire offensive starting corps will get at least one possession. That's what Stefanski liked to do. That's what he liked to do with that playoff season as well. Baker always got one possession with each preseason game. You imagine he'll do the same here. So that will be interesting to see there. So let's move away from the game and more towards the Hall of Fame itself. So the reasons to why the Browns got into that game, were invited to that game, was obviously because Joe Thomas was being called up to the Hall of Fame. Did anyone catch his speech?
Small chunk.
Yeah, to be honest with you, snippets was enough. I mean, the whole speech is very nice, but the snippets where he talks mainly about, that I've seen some snippets where he talks about his, his commitments to, the players and, him thanking the coaches and all the rest. And I find it funny. He must be one of the only Hall of Famers that, commends coaches that continually put him in bad spots and into consistent losing seasons. He's probably the only Hall of Famer to ever have to talk about that. a lot. But was there? I mean, realistically, a lot can be said about Joe Thomas. I don't think we'll dig into it too much. Is there anything which you guys, remember particularly fond, or is there anything which you will remember fondly about Joe Thomas? From his time at the Browns. For me, it's just the fact that he was a constant in a sea of consistent change. There were only two things that were constant about the Browns. One being that everything was changing all the time, and number two is the fact that Joe Thomas would still be on the team sheet any given Sunday. Which is what I always loved about him. But what's one thing that you'll take from Joe Thomas and his Hall of Fame career, now that we can call it that?
Yeah, I think for me the best thing about any offensive lineman, it's a bit like what they always say about a referee in football. The best referees, you just don't even realise they're on the pitch. And Joe Thomas hardly had his name called in games, because generally offensive linemen have the name called for holding, for false starts, or for giving up sacks. And it was very rare that you actually heard Joe Thomas's name called through a broadcast, wasn't it? He was a pillar of excellence and consistency. Since he's gone into media, he's been so positive about Cleveland and his time in Cleveland. I thought the coolest thing from his speech wasn't actually his speech. I thought it was the fact that his family were the ones that sort of presented him for the induction, which I just thought summed the guy up perfectly. It was a really, really nice touch. His kids and his wife rightfully looked so proud. And he has, as you say, the only thing that is a real shame is that obviously he's not going to be there when the franchise turns around, certainly from a playing perspective. Like I say, I think he's going to continue to be a big advocate. They'll keep him involved in the organisation in some way, shape or form. But it's a real shame that he never got to experience that sort of playoff run that his play undoubtedly deserved. For me, as I said earlier when we were talking about DeJuan Jones, linemen don't get a lot of love, but the fact that he's beloved amongst Browns fans probably shows you and tells you everything that you need to know. One of the absolute superstars from my early years of following the Browns, and he's missed to this day, isn't he? Let's be honest, because
absolutely,
unfortunately, whoever takes the role, it's Jed Wills at the minute, and it'll be somebody after Jed Wills. They'll always be compared to him there, when there's not many that are ever going to be as good.
Would you take Joe Thomas in his current condition or Jed Wills?
Joe Thomas in his current condition is probably 140 pounds by your reckoning, so he might get pushed around a little bit these days, mate, to be honest.
I mean, I'd still take it. I think I'd still take it. No, brilliant. Thank you for that, Sean. That was, I think that was very aptly put. Owain, give us your main takeaway from 73.
I can't really add too much to that. I thought that was really, really well put. A lot of the stuff that I feel about Joe Thomas, Sean just put really well there. So the only little thing I'd add is now he's been made officially my only Hall of Fame NFL follower on Twitter. So I'll take that little bit of bit of claim to fame there.
I was going to say, take it, take that 5-minute claim to fame. Absolutely. I've noticed that you two have agreed a fair bit tonight, and I'm going to claim that it's because Sean's been on the beer. Sean, exactly which beer is it that you're currently drinking?
I'm drinking a few Brewdog Hazy Janes, my friend.
Do you know what? It looked like a hazy as well. So it turns out that if you ever want to be agreeable, no matter what ends of the Browns fandom spectrum you're on, get some Brewdog Hazy Jane down you. We don't advocate to do it to excess, nor do we actually advocate any particular beer brand, but it seems to be it's doing the trick. Or maybe it's just pre-season and not ready to quite put the pads on yet. Either way, we shall see. It's not even barking mad yet, folks. So here's the last thing for you in terms of Hall of Fame. So, Owain, as you point out, Joe Thomas is your in terms of your claim to fame, is your one follower that is in the Hall of Fame. But in terms of Browns Hall of Fame, who's next?
Miles. Oh, Joel has probably got a chance. Batonio's probably got a chance, a small one, but similar to Joe Thomas in the sense that consistent in a lot of bad teams. Made a few Pro Bowls or All Pro as well, I think, at some point. So he's probably got a chance, but then if not, the only possible candidate's Myles Garrett, isn't it? And I fully expect he will make it whenever he retires. He'll be a first ballot, I would imagine, and rightfully so, to what he's done so far in his career. But unfortunately, we haven't got a ton of options to pick from, which kind of sums up the mess of the Browns in the last, since they came back. But Miles or Joel.
Sean, anybody else that you'd add to that list? I actually have a couple, so I'm going to wait and see as to what you say, and then I'll chop in if needs be.
Yeah, look, I think they're the two obvious ones in terms of the consistency and the standard of play. We'll wait and see on the longevity side of it. If Nick Chubb produces at the level that he has for another X number of years, it could do, but we all know what tends to happen with running backs, so we'll wait and see. I think there's a couple that have probably retired in recent history that, depending on how it's viewed, could be considered. They probably won't ever get into there, but just to put it into context, so you look at somebody like Josh Cribbs, for example, not a wide receiver, obviously a return specialist, held the record for the number of returns, touchdowns, and that kind of thing when the return was a much bigger part of the game. So he's somebody that, potentially could have been looked at, could have been considered. Obviously, as I say, certainly not going to be considered for play outside of special teams. But
no, but just to throw this out there, Devin Hester was a Hall of Fame finalist, and he obviously is best known for his return game as well. So that's definitely something to throw in there. He was on my list. Carry on.
Yeah, and then the other ones, I would say, obviously, historically, I know there's been a big clamour for a number of years to try and get Clay Matthews in based on historical performances.
Yeah.
It obviously feels as though the ship has probably sailed on that because it seems to be, every year comes and goes and it doesn't seemingly get any traction. You could make arguments based on his numbers that he was worthy of a shout. And the other one, I guess, and maybe it's just a little bit sentimental, but again, probably another specialist to be Phil Dawson. Again, pillar of excellence.
Stupidly on my list as well. I didn't think anyone would get Dawson.
What on earth is in this hazy Jane? That's what I want to know. Something is seriously going on tonight. We haven't even rehearsed.
We have not. So by the way, this came up like almost 10 minutes before the show started in terms of the schedule. No one's rehearsed anything. And yet, Dawson was also on my list. No, you're right. He holds a special place, I think, for me in terms of kickers, just because of the elements he was up against, and he was so consistent.
Yeah, no, absolutely. If you look at his career on the whole, you'd look at it, he was 84%, just under 84% from a field goal perspective. But you take into account, as you say, the conditions. Let's be honest, we'd probably be quite happy if Cade York got to 84% as things stand. So
20% of this, right?
So I think those two, in terms of specialists from more recent past, could potentially be players that could be considered on, with the right circumstances and everything. But yeah, in terms of absolute superstars, like you say, Batonio, again, just for stellar play on the offensive line, year after year after year, perennial Pro Bowler, and like I say, obviously Garrett, Chubb potentially.
I'm just wondering. Another one has come into my head, and I'm just wondering as to Mitchell Schwartz.
Not for
As
me,
another one. If you're talking Batonio, do you also count Schwartz in the conversation?
No.
I wouldn't personally, because I don't think he played long enough overall. I could be wrong on that. I'd be lying if I said I got it. It
was a relatively short career compared to most.
Yeah.
But I've literally just typed in Mitch Schwartz Hall of Fame to see if there's any traction on that, and there's a few Chiefs posts. So I thought throw that one out there. The other one, and this one probably is a fall short, but I think that his career has been stellar. Joe Hayden.
Still, don't think he's getting in there, but
No,
hell
but it's another one that if you're talking, let's say the Clay Matthews like barrier of could well be nominated for a number of years but never actually gets over the line. I reckon that you could easily have the likes of Hayden or Cribbs, like you say, Sean, or Schwartz just sort of dabbling for a couple of years or so until their nominations are eventually pulled.
Yeah, I think I can understand the logic in your argument. Look, we've had some decent line play over the years, haven't we? You could probably throw the likes of Alex Mack into that as well, who had a reasonable career. But I think the play of Thomas Bitonio in particular, certainly on a different level to those from a consistency and a longevity point of view, that'd be the difference. And I've got to say, I love Spencer's comment. We can't put Mitchell Schwartz in just in case he's any relation to Anthony Schwartz, which I think is an absolutely fantastic point that Spencer makes. So yeah, let's steer well clear of Mitch just on the off chance.
Oh yeah. Final question before we move off anything Hall of Fame game or Hall of Fame, etc. Anthony Schwartz is done with the Browns now, right? Surely.
Yeah,
surely.
You would like to think so, but it's one of those. To be honest, I wouldn't have been surprised, and I half expected to. They made a couple of roster moves, didn't they? And you were just half expecting that Anthony Schwartz's name was going to crop up, and it still hasn't. And you just sort of think, why? But
you kind of think, is Barry going to hold on to him for as long as possible in the
just
hope
so he doesn't count him as a bust?
Yeah, and in the hope that he just suddenly turns into an NFL player overnight, wakes up and learns how to catch or keep hold of a football. It's
hurts
rough.
the soul.
It is
just
rough.
Hurts the soul.
I'd hate to be in his head at the minute.
Oh yeah, absolutely. But I wouldn't hate to be in his bank account.
No, he just needs to go off and try and be a sprinter at this point.
Yeah, I mean he's got the money now to just invest in athletics.
Mm-hmm.
Just do that, or just go to a darkness retreat somewhere for a while and clear your head. One or the other. But please just don't do it as a wide receiver for the Cleveland Browns. I think he's getting very, very close to being into. Remember Sendejo's employee 23 moniker? I think we're very close to employee number 10.
I even think that's harsh on Sendejo. That's how bad Schwartz has been.
Sendejo then did a very tongue-in-cheek post saying that the Browns won't get back to the playoffs because he's not playing with them. Of which, love the sass, but he's the last person to throw stones. Right, let's move away from that and just to a bit of Browns news. So obviously we've already talked about the fact that we expect starters to start on Friday night. That is Saturday morning, Friday night. I think it's a 12:30 kickoff if I'm remembering it correctly. You can watch it on DAZN, of which is let's leave that for another episode of Barking Mad. I don't think we're ready for that yet. Put it this way, it is interesting. It was an interesting broadcast, but they do have Gaming 40 now. In terms of the actual news, we do have a few injuries to be aware of. Both Alex Wright and Isaiah Thomas have both just had successful surgeries, and they are both expected back and towards the early part of the regular season. They won't be ready for the start of the season. They'll be ready probably around week 3, week 4 is the expectation. Jerome Ford and Drew Forbes were both carted off as well, but there's been no word about their injury designation at this point. I mean, realistically, apart from potentially getting someone on the defensive line to cover, don't really see this doing much to our plans at this point. It's not, without meaning to sound harsh, it's not really something of which is going to be bothering the roster builders too much by the looks of it, unless anyone's clamoring for some Alex Wright.
I don't think so. And I think from what I've seen on both of those injuries is something that I'm really familiar with. Those injuries, I'm guessing from the surgery they've had and the timelines that they've been given, that they've had some sort of meniscus tear and they've had a little bit of a cleanup, something I've had like 3 times at this point. So it's not like the worst rehab in the world. It's not the longest injury in the world. Could even be back like 4 4 weeks maybe if all things go well. So I don't expect it to change all that much. And like you say, the depth pieces anyway, they've still got Miles, Smith, Okoronkwo in front of them. So yeah, I don't see it changing too much. The only thing you could say is they'll be probably a little bit anxious to see how bad that hamstring injury is for Ford. Because obviously at the minute he's running back 2, would probably get a fair bit of workload, as that Kareem Hunt replacement. So they will probably be sweating a little bit on that one and ready to make a move, I would imagine, if they need to.
Sorry, I was just looking at Demetric Felton's stats from the other night. 7 carries for 46 yards and a touchdown. It might well be that he ends up playing the spot role until that, if there is not an obvious replacement there. But Dalvin Cook's still on the market, is he not?
That seems like it's going to be the Jets, I would have thought.
I mean, running backs are going for about 10p at the moment.
I think if there's any running back on the free agency market that maybe makes a little bit of sense, it's probably Zeke.
Zeke's still on the market, yeah. You can get him for 20p.
So I think that would be the one if they do make a move. Just because Felton did look decent the other night, but I don't think they'll want him as anything else other than like a scat back, someone that can take on the receiving role of Kareem Hunt rather than sort of any significant workload to give Chubb a rest. So yeah, I think Zeke would probably be the one, and who knows, maybe there's a little bit left in the tank with him that they couldn't get out of him in Dallas, and maybe the Browns can squeeze out a year of half decent players running back too. So I wouldn't hate it all that much at the right price.
Yeah, and the right price, I think, is something that you would be able to get this season. If you can just get them on a year deal where you pay them relatively well, but you're only keeping them for the year, because it seems to be that running back prices have just sunk to the ground, of which is a whole other thing beyond this show. We paid our running back well, thank you very much. Let's move on to talk about another running back. We're going to go away from immediate Browns news and more to vicinity of Browns, shall we call it? Stuff of which doesn't necessarily affect us, but we know of them. So Kareem Hunt, for example, going to New Orleans, by all indicators are pointing to that. Owain, you're shaking your head. Did that not happen?
I think he was going to sign there, but his agent called him away to the Indianapolis Colts, I believe, yesterday. So yeah, it seems like he was going to sign in New Orleans, but it seems like the Colts have come in with a better offer.
Cool. Okay. Well, that's something which I didn't know about until just now. So in that case, Kareem Hunt looks like he's going to the Indianapolis Colts. Is that a good move for either party?
No. Doesn't make any sense to me, that.
No, no sense to me either.
Apart from maybe using it as a little bit of leverage in the Jonathan Taylor situation, which still I can't see it doing anything for that either. So yeah, it makes no sense. They're not going to be contending this season. The only person it makes sense for is Hunt, because he's going to get more money than he was going to before. And that's the aim of the game, isn't it? So other than that, makes no sense.
Yeah. Sean, question for you, bud. Jadeveon Clowney visited the Baltimore Ravens. Is this a good move for the Browns?
Yeah, well, look, based on what we've seen, I don't think anyone's going to be shaking in the boots if Jadeveon Clowney's lining up against us a couple of times a year. I think his career overall will probably be viewed as quite a big disappointment, considering the amount of hype that surrounded him when he came in as the number 1 overall choice. He's not had a bad career. I'm not saying that. He's not been a complete and utter flop. But on the flip side of it, I don't think his production has matched what people expected it would have been. He had a fairly decent first year with the Browns, but obviously was majorly disappointing, I think, last year. sandwiched in between that, he had that was it really disappointing year with the Titans. I want to say I could be wrong on that, but I think it was the Titans, wasn't it? After he went to the Texans, obviously in the draft. So overall, I think he's had a pretty poor time of things. If the Ravens want to keep paying over the hill players overpriced contracts, then long may that continue.
Exactly. Who are the Ravens all of a sudden? What has Ozzie Newsome done with himself?
Well, do you know what I mean? Again, we can probably talk at length on that, and obviously we're already 40 minutes in, so let's not delve too far down that rabbit hole. But I would say that there's probably a bit to that, in as much as I think if you look at the Ravens from a roster building point of view over the last couple of years, there's been some extremely questionable decisions. They've gone from an organisation that seemingly had a very clear and cohesive plan, and you could tell the direction they were moving in, to all of a sudden they're doing things that you would describe as un-Ravens-like. So, there are plenty of questions being thrown up by some of the decisions that they're making.
Absolutely. We'll cover that more in an AFC North pod, which we'll have in a couple of weeks' time as we build into that. Talking still on, actually, no, we're not talking on the AFC North just yet. Instead, a wine question for you. John Johnson has rejoined the Los Angeles Rams. Probably the best spot that he could have hoped for, and probably the right sort of team at the moment for considering his performance levels the last couple of years.
John Johnson's a tough one for me. He was one player that I really, really wanted in that free agency class. And it just never worked out for whatever reason. I think he got on some Browns fans' nerves, including myself, because of how vocal he was in the media at times and some of the stuff he was saying, which should have been kept in-house. But I don't think all of his bad play was necessarily his fault either. I think there was a lot of not using him to the best abilities. The roster building, I think, was probably questionable in the safety position in terms of his skill set versus Grant Delpit's skill set. And then, I think Johnson was then used, in roles that he wasn't comfortable with as a result of that. So I don't think he's a bad player at all. I think he'll go on to have a good career from here. For me, it's disappointing that he's chosen to go back to the Rams just because, they're going to be shocking this season. You would think lowest spenders in the NFL this season, which is, we talked last year about.
I say it's not exactly Rams-esque, is it?
Yeah, we talked last year about the salary cap being fake and so on, but I think they are now proving that when you come over to the other side of that, it's painful. And they've still got some big contracts there. So I'd imagine past those 2 or 3 big contracts, I'd imagine that roster is looking terrible at this point. So, on a personal level, I hope he does well. But I think it's going to be a rough season for the Rams, and that's going to do nothing for his prospects of getting a good move after the season. You wouldn't think.
No, definitely, I'd agree with that. And a question for the pair of you, and this is a little tongue-in-cheek. Jamar Chase, when interviewed by NFL Network about Joe Burrow's injury, said that he told Joe to sit out until week 5 to make sure that his leg is healed up right so they can go forward. Now, how many chances in hell is it that Joe Burrow is actually going to listen to that advice and not play in week 1, week 2, especially when you consider that those games are against the Cleveland Browns and the Baltimore Ravens? I believe that you've got more chance of Cleveland winning the Super Bowl for the next 5 seasons straight, I think, than that being the case. Because unless the injury is far worse than it's been made to appear, I just don't see the competitiveness in him stopping him from getting on that field.
I don't think it'll
the only thing I would say
his decision, to be honest. I don't know about Sean, but I think what Chase said actually holds a lot of water. And if that ankle injury is not right, then even those first 2 games are important, they're not too important that he can't sit them out. And I'm sure they would much prefer lose those first 2 games than him play and then lose him for the season, because he is their season, just like Watson's going to be ours. If he's not available post week 2, it doesn't matter who they play, and they're not going to win. So, I wouldn't necessarily say this most unlikely thing in the world.
Well, the latest news hot off the press is apparently that question's just been posed to Zach Taylor following practice today, and Joe Burrow is still weeks away from returning. They're actually now saying that, and I said this at the time, I think that injury is going to prove to be worse than first anticipated. I actually don't think it's a question of he's going to sit because he'd rather sit. I just think he'll have to sit because he won't be fit personally. The other thing to bear in mind as well, we talked earlier, didn't we, about the Browns pre-season quarterback play. And if you remember back to last year, Joe Burrow didn't play in the pre-season last year. And what did he do in his first game? He threw 4 interceptions. So, at the end of the day, he is obviously vital to the success of the Bengals and the future success of the Bengals. As much as it's a difficult start, in as much as they've got divisional games, and we talked about that, and it seems as though it should be a competitive AFC North, they wouldn't want to get off to an 0-2 start. They'll have enough faith in the rest of the roster that they'll remain competitive anyway, from their perspective, and so they should, because you look at the players that they've got, they should be competitive. But I think this injury is a lot worse than what people want to admit, and I think Joe Burrow will miss a significant start of the season, which will put the Bengals up against it.
Yeah, I agree. And I think they were purposely vague in what they were saying when it first happened. And I think, some people will scoff at the idea of, GMs and coaches being vague in terms like to give themselves any sort of advantage in game planning and stuff. But it does happen. I've seen it happen in our version of football, that teams will be purposely vague about their injuries because they don't want the other coaches knowing who's available and who's not. And you might think that's stupid because it's Joe Burrow, and then you don't even know who the backup is for Cincinnati. But if they can get 1% benefit or even 0.5% benefit by being vague about Joe Burrow's status, they will try and do so. Especially because, like you said, those first 2 games are really, really important for them. So I agree with Sean. I think that injury is going to be worse than what they were trying to make out at the start. We've seen it with Lamar Jackson over the last 2 years. Those 2 injuries that he had were he's going to be available next week, and then next week come, and then it's going to be a month turned into 2. So yeah, I agree. I think it could be a long one.
I have to admit, if I knew about the Zach Taylor thing, I would have phrased that question completely differently. I didn't realize that was a goer. God, I'm excited for week 1 now. So if you'd like to, all right, go on. Temper me down.
No, it's all right. Obviously, like you say, that was literally hot off the press. I've just sort of Googled it and found that out myself. All I was going to say is I've just had a quick look at the Bengals schedule, which we mentioned the first couple of weeks. Their bye is only in week 7.
Mm-hmm.
I wouldn't be surprised if Joe Burrow doesn't see it until after the bye.
Oh, that is their season, though. Trevor Siemian until week 7, till week 8, technically.
If they can get 3-3 from the opening start of the season, they will trust that roster to be good enough to get them to where they need to get to.
Where are they? What are they? So it's Browns, Ravens.
Yeah, so Browns, Ravens, then Rams, Titans, Cardinals, Seahawks. Yeah. So, like I said, they will trust that roster to be 3-3
sounds pretty, not exactly out of the realms of possibility there. Yeah,
and let's be honest. How many backups did we see the Browns lose to last season? I wouldn't be counting that as a straight W.
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. It's just more of a case of, I'm thinking about it more from the Bengals' perspective. They don't want to be rolling out there with Trevor Siemian. Not crashing in on him or anything, but when you've got Burrow there, the drop is considerable. Yeah, and like you both say, Burrow's is the season there. But like with the schedule being that, I could definitely see Siemian going out and getting wins against the Rams, the Cardinals. The Titans would actually be a really interesting clash. I think with that being the case, because you would be looking at I'm just thinking that Titans defense probably wouldn't be able to hold a short passing game that well, but they can do a lot on the ground. So that would be really interesting, actually. But yeah, if you'd like to see Deshaun Watson take on Trevor Siemian with us, we will be at Felson's Birmingham on Sunday, the 10th of September for that game with the full 10 yards as they host their kickoff party. Take a look at full10yards.co.uk/kickoff and grab your ticket. We'd love to see as many Browns fans as possible there with us. Feel free to also grab us at our handle at Bleveland Brits on our Facebook page, wherever else, and let's do it. Let's watch it together because we're excited about this season. A couple of episodes in, I feel the excitement's already there, and let's start it out right. So, as we're talking about starting it out right, folks, Commanders obviously on Friday night. What are you guys looking for? Really, obviously we're looking for progress and looking to make sure that the rookies are still doing what they're doing. Are we paying particular attention to Watson, for example, and making sure that those routes are going right? Because I know that's one thing for me, and there's another player that I also have on my list that I am looking out for as well, but I'll let you guys hit your touch points first.
Yeah, I think I'll be paying really close attention to Watson. I think, as we've touched on already, he's our season, for better or for worse. He is our season. So it's important that he looks much, much better than what he did last year. Let's not beat around the bush. It is important. Does it matter in terms of the win and loss category? No, but you want to see him look a hell of a lot better. And then, on a personal level, the one player that I'm really excited to see is Elijah Moore. I've absolutely loved since college. Wanted the Browns to draft him when he was eligible. So to see him in a Browns uniform for the first time, apart from in a lot of highlight reels over the summer, that'll be particularly fun for me. So yeah, those are the two that I'm looking out for.
Brilliant. Sean?
Yeah, I think the offense speaks for itself. I think you definitely want to see what Deshaun Watson looks and feels like. As I said last week, I think I certainly probably didn't give enough credit for how important the preseason, etc., was going to be for him. So I think I'm really excited to see what the offense actually does look like. But for me, I'm probably more interested to see the new look defense a little bit. I don't think the starters are going to get too much playing time, but obviously it'll be interesting to see a series or two with, the majority of the starters that are in there. There's expectations that the line will play a lot better. I think certainly it left a lot to be desired again last week with, like I said, those depth pieces. I think there's a real drop-off. And we're just waiting for somebody to stake claim to one of these roster spots, aren't we? Because I think the front four is probably locked in. You've obviously got Okoronkwo, who's definitely going to make the roster, who's probably the fifth lineman, if you like. We'd expect Alex Wright, despite the injury, will definitely be, persevered with. So outside of that, though, you really are crying out for somebody to step up and sort of lay claim to one of these roster spots. So be interesting to see what the play of the defensive line is like. And I also think it'll be interesting in the back end of the defense as well, because I think there's a nice little battle there between Martin Emerson and Greg Newsome in terms of, who plays outside, who plays inside. Because I think Newsome would probably have his preference. I think Emerson is certainly more suited to outside, as we say. But that's another interesting little battle to look on, because, again, like you say, you'd expect with improved line play, it naturally leads to better secondary play, doesn't it? So, interesting to see what the defense overall does.
Yep, definitely. And shout out to Sean, their first-time caller, who put in there that before you talked about the backfield there, that Greg Newsome needs to show more in pre-season. Definitely a point there, because that battle will be quite interesting as to who's likely to get more reps throughout the season as a starter.
Is he going to play? Because he's been injured for the last week or so, hasn't he? He hasn't practiced, so.
I've not seen. I think he's on the depth chart. I think he's on the unofficial depth chart when I looked last. I mean, I'm happy to be shouted down, of course, but you'll see him at some point in the preseason, I imagine, unless the injury is quite bad, because you do kind of need that battle. I think that we are getting to that point. We alluded to it back in January that it was something that could heat up because Emerson had surpassed expectations as well. So that will be an interesting battle. The one thing that I really want to see more than anything else, I don't even want a full game. I just want a field goal shootout just to make sure that Cade York can just consistently hit field goals. You know, if we're on like 3rd and like 13 or something like that, sod working on 3rd down play with rookies and all the rest of it. I want Cade York to have to sink that 37-yarder, that 42-yarder, that 49-yarder. You know, because he needs all the reps he can get, I think, to get himself right. It's all that I've seen online this week since that miss. I have a feeling that if he doesn't get through it in the next couple of weeks, it's only going to fester worse. And you can't have that going into week 1. You know, we can't be at the same situation as we were in like week 3, week 4, week 5 of last year, where we're essentially carrying a kicker who doesn't have the confidence to sink them. You know, so stupidly enough, it's that's really getting to me. And I thought that drafting a kicker was supposed to stop us from having these thoughts. But the oracle that is Owain Jones continues to haunt the Cleveland Brits podcast now and forevermore. You have this nice little glow coming from what I assume is your TV screen, Owain, as well at this present moment that sort of gives you that haunted sort of vibe. Yeah, so, I mean, if anyone's watching on Spotify, for example, I implore you to go to the video version because that was quite something then. Right, considering that I am starting to go a little loopy, let's go for a little bit of Barking Mad to finish us off.
Here we go, Brownies! Here we go! Woo, woo. Here we go, Brownies! Here we go! Woo, woo.
Yep, so 2 things, folks, and I'm not going to touch on it for all that long because we're coming up towards the hour, but just looking to get your thoughts. So the Browns, I find, have always been really good at getting fan buy-in, you know, for the small stuff, right? They always go to the fans when it's time to do something brand related, whether it's picking out a new logo to add to the manifold logo collection that isn't the helmet, or, you know, what's on midfield, or, you know, unis, that sort of thing. They're always really good with fan engagement. They put out a vote once again for what you'd like to see on midfield at Cleveland Brown Stadium this year. All I saw when that came out was, oh no, not another one, another fan vote. Why can't you do things for yourselves? You know, coming from a world of European football where, you know, owners and managers and all the rest of it don't give a crap as to, you know, what your feelings are. They're just going to go and do things their way. I find it really refreshing. But do you guys feel like we have do you feel like we're spoiled with fan votes, or do you feel like it's naff, or we should have some consistency, or what? I just find it. I find complaining about democracy very un-American. This is supposed to be American football.
I think this may be the one that me and Sean disagree on, because I'm guessing Sean's going to take the I don't care approach to this one. But no, I don't see the problem in it. Like, I see loads of comments every time something like this happens, or we don't care, just win games of football. But guess what? In August, in June, in July,
you can't win games of football.
So why do people waste their time in tweeting Browns accounts just win games of football when there's no football happening? So that for one pisses me off. The second point that I'd like to make is, out of 435 fan votes we've had in the last 3 years, or whatever it is, why have we not had one for our primary logo? That's
because you're not allowed to touch that one. They called that the Owain Jones law. The helmet must remain.
Get rid of the helmet, put the elf on it, and then just be done with it.
I mean, it looks like they're getting that way. I mean, if you've seen Deshaun Jackson's woolly hat of choice, of which, by the way, a red flag there, he's wearing a woolly hat in flipping August. But that has the elf on it this year. They've gone very hard on this new look elf there. Sean, are you a fan of freedom? Or do you think that we should be under the oppressive rock of Cleveland social media accounts?
I'm going to surprise you, mate. I really like it. I think it's good that
I knew you would. Sean loves democracy. Sean loves freedom.
I think it's really good that they get people involved in stuff like this. Ultimately, I could take the view that, look, it doesn't matter what's on the halfway line ultimately, but as you've just both rightly said there, it also doesn't hurt to say, if you've got a preference, what would you rather it be? It's not going to change anything ultimately, but if it makes you feel like you've got a bit of a say in it, then I'm all for it. I've got no problem with it whatsoever, mate, to be honest. I think the difficult thing with all of these things is, as Owain's just said, the problem is, particularly on Twitter, which is obviously a cesspool, let's be honest, is that you just get people complaining about anything for the sake of it. And it's like, oh, well, we can choose these 4 things. Why can't we choose this thing as well? And it's like everybody's opinion's right as long as it corresponds with mine. So I don't get engaged in all of that kind of crap that goes on with it. But, to be fair, like I say, I've got no issue with it whatsoever. But I'm all for the helmet on the halfway line. Absolutely. That is the best logo the Cleveland Browns have ever had and ever will have.
Sean is not a fan of freedom. It's the elf or nothing. And then one final thing. So yesterday we saw the launch of Netflix's new documentary about Johnny Football. Obviously, it's way too early for us to actually get into it yet. The main question I want to ask is, do you even have the guts to watch it? I don't even know if I've got the nerve to actually watch it, because I think I'm just going to hate every minute of it. And I don't know if I've got the stomach for
it. This is a question I've asked myself over the last week or last, however long it's been since the adverts have come out. Am I going to watch it or am I not? I don't really care for Johnny Manziel.
Oh yeah, it's not Johnny Manziel I care about. It's hearing how shit we were.
Yeah, I don't even care about that. It's just what gets me with Johnny Football is that it's going to be like, well, I'm guessing it's going to be like a sob story type documentary that's geared for us to feel sorry for him. But it really irks me when professional sportsmen with a lot of talent effectively piss away their careers through lack of effort, because they're in an incredibly privileged position and they have everything at their feet. And although that it's a lot harder than a lot of people make it out to be, I'm not disputing that at all. When people just throw it away and don't put any effort in, it really annoys me. So I don't want to be in a situation when I'm watching it and feeling sorry for Johnny Football at all. So
that's when you turn it off. That's when you just click the button, shout no at the television, and walk away.
I probably will watch it, but I'm hoping I don't get to that point where I'm starting to feel for him, because he brought a lot of that on himself.
I think as long as you hold that in your heart, you will be fine, Owain. I think you'll be fine. Sean's just put in a comment saying it's all Johnny with no Browns input. Yeah, there's no Browns input, Sean. My point being is that if it's Johnny and his agents and all the rest of it basically saying, God, the Browns were so stupid to draft. There was no way that he should have been drafted for. Except it's just gonna anger me to the point of no return, and I just don't know if I've got the mental capacity for that right now. I'm very unsure. Sean, anything from you, mate, on that?
Yeah, I think it'll actually be a really interesting documentary. I talked last week, didn't we? We were talking about Perry on Winfrey, completely different set of circumstances, but I made the point last week about players that sort of new into the league and the amount of support that actually they probably do need. I think this will be a pretty high profile one that you'll highlight that further from the conversation we were having last week. It was a young kid with the world at his feet. He was obviously, very, very highly talked about. And as you both just rightly said there, obviously didn't have the mental capacity, capability to deal with it, maybe through faults of his own, maybe through no faults of his own. Obviously, I think the documentary goes into that. I've seen nothing outside of a couple of lines where it talks about a suicide attempt and this, that, and the other. So it is obviously quite hard hitting. But look, the Johnny Football with the Cleveland Browns was a perfect storm, wasn't it? We hadn't long changed ownership. They wanted to make a splash. They wanted the Cleveland Browns to be the talk of the league. They felt this was an opportunity to all of a sudden get all eyes on the product. It obviously backfired horribly, set the franchise back. So from a football perspective, it was an absolute catastrophe. There's no doubt about it. But ultimately, it looks a young man's life involved in it. You won't be the first, you won't be the last. That's, potentially drafted too young, too high, wrong situation. I actually think it'll be a really interesting documentary. So I probably will give it a watch. I think to be fair, I think all of these companies, Netflix, Amazon, they've done a fantastic job with these sports documentaries as a general rule of thumb. There's not been many that I've watched and sort of really not enjoyed. I think the quarterback documentary on Netflix, as an example, that was released a month or two ago, I thought was quite good. I think the Formula One stuff's excellent. And I think the All or Nothing stuff on Netflix, on Amazon has been pretty good. So, if you're a fan of sport, you'll be a fan of this. I would have imagined. So, yeah, looking to probably try and squeeze it into the viewing calendar at some point, man.
Yeah, and Hard Knocks tomorrow.
I definitely won't be watching that. Definitely.
That's when it goes too far.
Yeah,
Johnny Football's one thing, but Aaron Rodgers and the Jets just can't have that.
Yeah, genuinely, I think, has there been a good Hard Knocks series since the Brown series, even from a neutral perspective? Because it just feels to me like a franchise that's been going downhill a little bit. I think it's really lacked in any sort of entertainment value whatsoever, and you can just imagine that the whole focus of this year will be on Aaron Rodgers. And unfortunately, it's pre-season with the New York Jets where Aaron Rodgers is hardly going to play. So actually, it's not going to be all that interesting. So
I thought the Lions one last year was fairly good. I think that what made the Browns one particularly grabbing, apart from us being Browns, is that there were a lot of egos in that room. Even at that coach level, Hugh Jackson basically just being ignorant. You got flipping Tubman there just looking to gun for his job. Everyone was kind of gunning for everyone's job. The players were kind of just loose cannons. You could tell that everyone was pissed off with Hugh. It was that it was something else, and it was during a time where there was real change going on. So, I mean, the Lions I thought was all right. I did like the Lions one last year because I felt like they were going through the same sort of stuff. The Jets less so, obviously, but there is hype around it, so that might be interesting. I watch it every year anyway. I think it just gets us gets us back to the start of the NFL season. Really, it's as ingrained in my psyche now as watching Draft Day on Draft Day, as watching Believeland the night before Week 1. ESPN Player's gone now though, so God knows how I'm going to be able to watch that. If anyone has any way of watching Believeland in its entirety, including the LeBron bit at the end, please let me know. I really wish I'd recorded it. It's as ingrained as that now. I'm watching Friday Night Lights as well in August, which I'll start doing soon as well.
The League, ever seen that? Because
I have not.
That's my go-to.
Is that your go-to?
Yeah,
I'll have to give that a go.
All fantasy football, like group of mates playing fantasy football, and it's real funny program. If anyone hasn't watched it, that's a top American football type program.
Fantastic. Right, folks, we'll leave it there. Speaking of fantasy football, if anyone's interested in a paid league, Believe in Brits podcast is running their annual one this year. Just keep an eye on the Twitter handle for more details in regards to that. I think we've got 9 spots already taken up, but we've got room for 3 more if anyone wants any part of that. Like I said, if you want to join us for our watch party at 14 Yards kickoff party at Felston's Birmingham, please log on to 14yards.co.uk/kickoff, or you can always talk to one of us either via Twitter, Facebook, WhatsApp group. Half of you know where we are, half of you know where we live, which is rather concerning. But yeah, just hit us up. We're more than happy to sort of help out as well where we can. We just want to see as many people there as possible as well. And next week we will be talking about the roster actually in a bit more detail as we start going into our preseason talks as we now get into the preseason fully. So enjoy, Commanders, on, is it Friday night? Yeah, Friday night. Enjoy that. We'll be back next week. Date to be confirmed. And until then, have a good one.